So thank you, Salima. I am so honored tonight to be hosting this evening's interview, Salima, with the wonderful Salima Pirani. As many of you know, Salima is the vice chair here at the Mindfulness Society of Canada. She is a Reiki master teacher, a mindfulness instructor and student, a lead nature steward, a retreat organizer, and an amazing family member, friend, and mentor to so many of us. For anyone who's curious and interested, I'm going to briefly share that Salima is offering a live Reiki and meta healing this coming Wednesday evening. She has a Reiki level 1 course upcoming November 18th to 19th, Reiki level 2 at the start of December, as well as a psychic awareness course at the end of the month. I'm going to pop in Salima's website into the chat. I encourage anyone who's interested to check out her website. She has amazing course offerings year-round. And I have received so many interesting and thoughtful questions from all of you for this talk tonight, and it's really tough to choose what to ask Salima. So I've done my best to curate a selection of them, but I'm not sure we'll have time in the 45 minutes that we're chatting to really get through as many questions as I would love to, and as I'm sure a lot of you have. But I am going to open up the floor probably around the last 15 minutes, and you can put your hand up or raise your hand virtually, and I'll certainly unmute the group, and you're welcome to jump in and ask any questions that might just come up spontaneously throughout the talk, or if I don't get to one of your questions, feel free to unmute, and should this be a big hit, I can collect more questions, and maybe Salima will be open to doing another evening like this. Salima, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jen. Hi.
Hi. I have so many questions, and it was really hard to pick where to start, but I thought maybe we'd start with a few just general questions for those of people here tonight who might not know your background, because I am fascinated by your background and fascinated for a lot of us who have ended up in the spiritual community and all have come on such unique paths. So for those of us who don't know, can you just briefly tell us what your job was before you entered the Reiki and mindfulness world?
Sure. Yeah. So before I started on this path, I can't say before I started on this path, but before I started on this as my career, my everyday work, I was working for several health-related organizations, always in fundraising, fund development, donor development, marketing, communications, event planning, always a lot of event planning. And so I've worked for hospitals, big hospitals. I've worked for health charities, planning huge events like walkathons for, 30,000 people on the waterfront in Toronto and that kind of thing. And then my very previous to this, my last role that I had was working for an African health organization. So the headquarters of the organization were in Nairobi, Kenya, and I was working in the Canadian office, so doing a lot of the same kinds of work like development, fundraising, event planning, communications, PR, like taking Canadian celebrities, if you can call Canadian celebrities, over to visit our projects and collect information and bring it back to the donors and all that kind of stuff. So it was very rewarding when we would see the results of our work. It wasn't so rewarding working for, like, let's say, a research organization when we didn't have that kind of immediate kind of gratification of like, where did the research dollars go? We didn't always have updates or news or announcements to give people. But when I would go to visit our projects in East and Southern Africa, there were always good news stories, there were always updates, there were always announcements, and just to see the community themselves organizing themselves. So it was, an African organization. It wasn't a North American or European, what we would call Northern organizations. It was for the people, by the people, and then the countries that existed in the organization outside of Africa were all about raising awareness and about funding and all that sort of thing. So that's it, maybe in a big nutshell, my background before this life of mine.
I love it. And Judy, I just saw your question pop up in the chat, and that was exactly where my mind was going. Because every time you talk about your career, I'm constantly in awe of what you've accomplished and the opportunities you've had. And it sounds super rewarding and exciting and different from most people's careers that I hear about. And my mind always goes to what made you give up your thriving career to choose the path that you're on now?
Well, it's true that health development is something that's going to be around forever. It's not going to go away. People are suffering and they don't have access to the bare necessities. They have to do things that are very difficult and challenging in order to make a living and support their own families or their own children. And so that kind of work, it's a lot to go and visit a project in a small town or in a rural area and see all the amazing work that's happening. It's also a little gut-wrenching to see how much more there is to do. And the thing that was there were two things that happened that were sort of the tipping point. One was I had already started practicing Reiki, and it was very different than my regularly scheduled life. My regularly scheduled life was chaotic. It was filled with anxiety. There were always deadlines. I had so many people coming at me for things. I was managing so many volunteers who are doing so many different things and managing staff. And so I was being pulled in so many different directions. And so when I started to practice Reiki, I would see like what would happen when I was working with one person at a time for an hour at a time. And I would get messages for them, or I would feel things, or I would get a flash of an image, and immediately I'd be able to tell the person what I felt or what I sensed was being worked on, and they would confirm it for me right away. And so there's something so powerful to that when you make such a strong connection with someone, because a lot of my work was kind of big picture stuff. And then I would go visit these projects and I would get like, a little kid would run up to me and say, "Can you sponsor me?" And it's just heartbreaking because that wasn't the model that we were working through. We were working on supporting the community so that they could themselves lift themselves out of poverty or poor health. So there was this whole thing where I was working with people one-on-one, and it spoke to me on a different level than my day-to-day work. And then no matter where I went, no matter what I was doing, I was very social. I was always out, and I would always meet people who wanted to go to Africa. I met people who wanted to work with us. I would get so many resumes from so many bright young people who just graduated from programs in international development or whatever it might have been. And there was just so much energy and so much excitement, and there was just so much there. And when I felt this feeling of like, okay, I think I've made my mark here, when I started at that last organization, we started with 3 staff, and by the time I left, I think we had 6 or 7 staff, and we had made some really important gains. And so I felt there was a sense of, this isn't doing it for me anymore. There's so many other really bright people who could come in, and so much talent that could come in and take this on. And my focus or my attention or my heart was really shifted to this whole world of healing that had started to open up for me. So it was on both ends, like on an exit end, and then also on a what's next kind of end.
That brings so many questions to mind, but I guess my first one would be, what introduced you to the healing world, or whom, if not what?
Well, I guess I have to really hand it to Jess. I think a lot of folks here, I'm just taking a look at who's on my screen. I think almost everyone, if not everyone here, knows my teacher, Jess. When I met him in university and lost contact with him, and I invited him to a film screening that we were having for a documentary we had in that organization. We had produced a documentary that was nominated for an Academy Award, and I had to fill 800 seats at the Bloor Cinema. And so I emailed, not just through the organization, but I emailed all my personal contacts, and he ended up coming out We were sitting at the end of a long table at Dooney's across the street on Bloor Street, and we were celebrating after the film screening and after the Q&A and everything. And I asked him some really tough questions, and it was really the way that he answered the questions. I had had Reiki from someone in the past, and I was underwhelmed, to say the least. I couldn't feel anything, and she probably wasn't properly attuned. And this is a thing, you know, some people don't get attuned or don't get properly attuned. A lot of people don't. And so when I asked him these questions, it was like I was pointing him, like, what makes you think you could just move to Thailand and live with the monks and wave your hands over people and all of a sudden, poof, they're perfect, right? I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in health development organizations, I've done this work before, and it takes a lot of energy and time and effort, and you can't just wave your hands over someone and they're perfect. And the way that he answered the question was just it was so graceful, and he was so patient with my questions. And he said, when I'm working with someone, the energy is doing its job, and then I get impressions about things, and I'm able to tell the person often about what's underlying, what's the root cause of their problem, their suffering. And then even when they get up and they leave, they take that knowledge with them, they're armed with that knowledge so that they can make lifestyle changes or whatever changes that they need to make in order to improve their condition or their life. And so I was really intrigued by that. And so I asked him a bunch of questions. Some of you heard this story before. I asked him a bunch of questions about myself. I'm like, okay, so if you're so psychic, can you tell me something about me? And we're in at this loud restaurant. It's getting darker and darker. The music's getting, as they do, getting louder and louder. The lights are getting dimmer and dimmer. People are getting drunker and drunker. He and I were just drinking tea and, no alcohol. And he answered, I asked him, tell me something about me. And he told me three things, one after the other. The first one was, your dad, you're holding a grudge against him for something that he didn't even do, and you need to let it go. And I was like, when I picked my jaw off the floor, I was like, okay, yeah, that's true. Tell me something else. And then he was like, your mom's really sweet, and you wish that you were as sweet as she is, and you're not. And that's also true. Who would say that, though, without being perfectly sure that that's the case and that the person could actually take that message in, right? And then I asked him, I was like, still not completely convinced. And so I asked him, can you tell me something physical, something tangible, physical? And he pointed at my knee and he said, you injured your knee when you were a kid and it hasn't healed and you shouldn't be wearing those high heels. And I was like, okay, that's what it took. I said, I'll come and get a Reiki treatment from you, because this was not what I experienced in the past, right? And it kind of blew my mind. I wasn't used to lying still for that long. I wasn't used to feeling and sensing all the energy flowing through. I wasn't used to noticing what it felt like afterwards to be so completely, to have this feeling of complete surrender and not be anxious. And so he gave me, I think, 2 or 3 more Reiki sessions before he went back to Thailand. He was living in Thailand most of the time. And before he left, I asked him, can I learn to do this? And he said, yeah, get 3 people together. I'll be back in the spring and I'll teach you a class. And so that's where it all started, really. It wasn't a plan of mine. It wasn't something that I had on my radar. I had been exposed to a tremendous amount of spirituality as a kid, and I kind of turned my back on it because of certain very, very negative, dangerous, negative experiences that I had. And so this was kind of my reintroduction to spirituality.
I love that story, and who doesn't find Jess awe-inspiring and finds a switch in everyone? I'm sure many of us here. I have so many questions about your experiences with Reiki, but I can't help but wonder, for someone myself who actually didn't have much spiritual exposure whatsoever as a child, can you give us a taste of what it was like for you as a kid and what you were exposed to?
Yeah, so my family was very active in their place of worship and in their community. And I remember they would have to go and preside over the congregation in the middle of the night, like from 4 to 5 a.m., the lights would be out in the prayer hall and people would meditate for an hour in the dark. And I was just a little kid, and they would just take me in my pajamas, and I would go and like lie down and fall asleep. And so it was, as ministers or community leaders, they would often be very engaged and very busy. They would go and visit people in the hospital and bless them and bring them things. And there was always volunteering going on. So I was volunteering ever since I was a young child, doing a lot of different things. And so it was always in our life on a very practical level. And then, there were times where I remember having visions or dreams or, horrible nightmares even. And I remember my parents at some point, I remember my dad telling me, my dad meditates every single morning without fail. Like he's just like a rock. Every single morning since I can remember, he's been meditating. And I remember this one time my dad said to me, if you pray or meditate, you will get whatever you want. And what kid doesn't want to hear that, right? So I imagined, I was like, okay, I want a Barbie doll, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to pray for the Barbie doll and I'm going to get the Barbie doll. And I imagined in my mind, as a kid would, I imagined a Barbie doll coming and descending down from the heavens in a soap bubble and popping right in front of me, and then I would have this Barbie doll to play with. Anyway, I did get the Barbie doll, but I think it must have been like at least 2 days, something like 2 days. I played with the doll for 2 days, and then I noticed something really interesting, and that was that I was bored with the Barbie doll and I wanted something else. And there was this real, I can't describe to you because I was so young, but I really remember this feeling of wanting, and just observing the fact that no matter what I got, I would want something more. Like it became so clear to me. And it's funny that I ended up on this, in this path and practicing the Dhamma and practicing mindfulness. And one of the main things that we're taught to see is craving, aversion, craving, and delusion. And I saw it as a kid. It was something that was so obvious. It was really clear to see that there was craving there.
I'm really soaking that in because I, as a child, can understand that experience. And evidently, it's no surprise that you were drawn to mindfulness and your heart was already on a path, as so many of us who found such special and one of a kind teachings found this path as well. I think I'm just going to let that one percolate because I think it's a statement in itself, looking at childhood and how that brought you here. And it kind of wanted just to make me wrap up just the overall storyline of, is there anything that you miss about your old business career when you look back on it now, how you shifted your life into a different spiritual form? Is there anything that you would make any changes to or tell your younger self or miss just reflecting?
Oh, there's a lot of things I would tell my younger self. Yeah. Are there things that I miss? Not really. No. If I were to, I guess one of the things that I kind of took for granted was that when you are employed by somebody, there's a lot of personal stuff that you don't have to take care of anymore. Like you don't have to worry about things like, I got to make sure that this gets in the bank, or that the taxes are so simple. Like those types of things I might miss a tiny bit, but I really don't miss a lot of the the business speak, the jargon, the constant like even the world of like greed and craving. And even though I was working for a lot of nonprofit organizations, there was this constant, like, we have to set higher targets every year and meet those targets. And there's this constant feeling of like pressure to like perform. And there was very little, like, even in that world, there was very little of this feeling of like at the end of the day, like I did something really great. It's kind of interesting, even though I was working for a lot of really great causes. At the end of the day, it was hard. Like it was rare. It happened, but it was rare at the end of the day to kind of go to bed thinking, "Wow, I really made a difference today." So,
I guess on a personal level for myself, and maybe a general level for everyone in attendance, um, I'm curious, for so many of us who are involved in mindfulness in a spiritual world like Reiki or other healing practices, is there anything that comes to mind on how we can make it a bigger part of our lives? Or I guess obviously not everyone's in a place where they can just shift gears and change careers. Um, but we make an effort to be here every Sunday. We make an effort to attend all the courses that we can. But is there any other advice you'd lend on, letting your heart follow or lead more?
stop watching TV. Honestly, like whenever I hear people talking about television, I kind of like my eyes glaze over because I don't see it being a good use of time. It's not that I don't expose myself to media, but I just can't find myself getting interested in fake people's problems. I mean, there's so many real people and real people's problems that I encounter every day, that I just find that there's certain things that are unskillful, and that's one of them. If people want to make a small shift, then join Karen's Sangha. She has an open door to anybody who wants to come and practice online. You don't even have to get out of your pajamas if you don't want to. And I commend Karen for like going on 3 years of like every single morning. And in the summers, I know it's every other day, but every single weekday, she has this open door and she just, 5 minutes of an introduction on a topic or a guided metta on Wednesday mornings. And then you get to sit for 20, 25 minutes with your practice. So dead simple, like, yay, Karen, for putting this out there, like amazing. Yes, show up on Sundays. You never know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about different things, but show up on Sundays. This group of people here, I'm looking at the faces that I'm seeing on my screen. These are good people. Surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with the right kind of energy. Nourishment is not just what you eat. It's what you listen to. It's what you watch. It's what you expose yourself to. I heard a really interesting statistic this week, which was something like people who watch the news every day or expose themselves to the news every day, take in the news, they report feeling 27% unhappier. 27% unhappier. Like, that's more than a quarter unhappier. Why would you willingly do that? So I have this a bit of a thing for myself, and it's like if people come and tell me something, or if I hear something, then it's probably newsworthy. I don't think I've ever really missed out on much because I'm not listening to the news. So put your mind in the right place, put your attention in the right places. And then if you want to make a bigger difference, then find a good teacher. There's several right here in this group. Find a good teacher and take a course. Learn how to practice mindfulness. It is the only way that busy people like us, who have responsibilities, who have families, who have things like that, in a very, I would say, I can't say easy, but in a very, it's not going to rock your whole world or make you leave your family or anything like that. It's kind of the simplest way to kind of slip into a practice that is supportive, that is mind-blowing, that is life-changing. Find a good teacher and take a course. And if you can't take a course, then show up here on Sundays. And if you can't show up on Sundays, or on the weekdays with Karen, then at least try and stay away from horrible, yucky TV. That's my little PSA for getting off television.
I love it. And I can 110% vouch for the teachers in this group, Karen Sangha, all the way whenever I can make it at a 9 a.m. I can put that in the chat later. and community to me is what means the world with this group. So I agree that the more we can be with like-minded people, the more we can be inspired and excited about it. So thank you for your evening PSA. And I'll roll into a little bit more about Reiki and mindfulness, which so much what we're all here for. But I'm curious just to kind of like get the general ball started of, you know, what is your favorite thing that stands out to you about Reiki above all else? What was the first thing that excited you about it or made you want to be involved with it day in and day out, other than helping people?
I think there's one of the, okay, so obviously this is for the same for a lot of people. One of the very first things that blew my mind was that when you dip into Reiki energy, you get insights into things that you wouldn't see on the surface. So you pick up information or knowledge, you're able to convey messages. That obviously, I think for a lot of people, it's kind of the first sort of thing that's kind of mind-blowing. I described my experience with my first experience on this topic with Jess, but I think one of the most meaningful things is teaching Reiki, and especially Reiki level 1, because the students come in on the first day, they don't know anything. A lot of the time, hopefully they don't read up on it beforehand. They don't really know anything. Usually they're suffering in some way, or they have a family member who's going through stuff. And it's a 2-day course. It's not a long time. It's not like 8 weeks or, it's not 6 months or anything like that. It's 2 days. And they go through the process of attunements and the 4 attunements over the 2 days. And they're terrified on the second day to like actually put their hands on somebody and like actually give somebody else Reiki. And, but then they finish the course, and the look on their faces when they're done is priceless. It's absolutely priceless. And when I don't usually tell people this, but sometimes when I finish the attunements and I'm standing in the front of the room and their eyes are still closed and they're still sitting in their chairs with their eyes closed, I look at them and I feel like they're like my kids. and there's often the word that comes to my mind when I see them sitting in their chair before I ask them to open their eyes again is, these are the loveliest people. They're so beautiful. These are like the most precious people in the world. And it's so heartwarming to actually be able to help somebody in a way where they can help themselves and then go on and help other people if they choose. So yeah, there's really not a lot that compares to that feeling. It's a beautiful feeling.
That is so precious and super special to me because I am one of those students. So that just like filled my heart knowing I might fit in that category. And I guess to get to something a little more juicier, since you spend almost day in and day out involved in Reiki and healing and helping others, I guess to put it bluntly, as you were thinking earlier, what is it like to be inside people's minds all day when you get healing, when you give healing after healing, and you have people come and go and you're reading on the phones or on Zoom? What's it like for you?
It's everything. It's at times it's still like, whoa, I can't believe I picked that up, or I can't believe I felt that, or sometimes it's mind-blowing in that way still, even to this day, even after teaching Reiki since 2011. And then there are times where it's like heavy. You have someone who is thinking of ending their life, or their child is, or they've been diagnosed with a very severe illness or terminal illness, or they're near the end. Some days can be heavy. I try not to take in a lot. I try not to take it on in that way. And so this is why some of you might know that I do nature stewarding. So I used to go out in the forest and get a little bit of a reprieve, and I would just go out for a walk, and it would sometimes be a very long walk, sometimes it'd be a really short walk. But I found that I needed a reset after a while, so sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. One of the interesting things is you start to kind of get this this feeling of there are certain trends or patterns with people, and you start to notice these patterns. Like if certain things start to show up and they have, I can't say that there's like 5 things that mean someone has low self-worth, or there's 3 things that mean someone has trust issues or whatever, but you start to see these patterns emerging over and over again, and you start to see that everybody suffers. There's nobody out there who doesn't suffer unless they're completely enlightened. And I only know one of those people, and they don't even speak English. They're not even on in North America or Europe. It's rewarding, but it's also, there's a lot of content. So I do need significant amount of time away from people, significant amount of time alone by myself with nobody's stories. Absolutely.
I guess knowing that you experience so much of other people's stuff, but you're also learning and growing an awareness of what's happening through Reiki and mindfulness, do you think that Reiki experience itself has deepened your own self-awareness?
Yeah. Well, for the very obvious reason that if I hadn't started practicing Reiki, I wouldn't have started learning mindfulness with Jess, right? So it was the gate, it was sort of the front gate that opened the house to mindfulness for me. When I first started learning with Jess, he wasn't teaching mindfulness. He was hosting meditations and doing lots of more like metta and guided meditations and full moon meditations and things like that. But eventually when he started teaching mindfulness, I didn't really have a choice. I was sort of like, whatever he was teaching, I went with it. And luckily I did. And I trusted him completely. And I'm glad that I had those instincts to do that. I'm grateful for those instincts to do that. But yeah, Reiki has made me more self-aware in and of itself, because when you are working with people every day, you're very conscious of how you speak to people. You're very conscious of the energy that they bring in and how you're interacting with them. There are certain messages that you know that they're not ready to hear, and so you can't give those messages to people, at least not in that way. You might have to back up and talk about something else first. So yeah, there's definitely this awareness of like, how am I projecting what it is that I need to share, and how can I make myself as soft as I humanly can in order to get this person to trust. And so there's a lot of that goes on when you're practicing Reiki, that you could be however you want. I mean, you want to be a bull in a china shop Reiki practitioner, you probably can. Probably Jess is more of that school, right? But I think the other thing that was really a big contributor for me was having a mentor who was extremely well versed in how to handle clients and how to handle really good listeners. So this is my vision educator, Elizabeth. And so she modeled for me over my years of going to see her for my vision, and how to improve my vision naturally. She modeled for me how to be an incredible listener, and how to hold space for people, and how to walk people through a process. Tonality, how to use your voice in an engaging and in a way that incites trust with people. So yeah, there's a lot of that you have to be very aware of how you're coming across to other people when you do this kind of work.
Really so beautiful, and just made me want to share with you that we're all so lucky to have you guiding and mentoring so many of us. So thank you, Salima. We're lucky
You're
you guys share your
welcome.
gifts with us. Speaking of gifts, as you've kind of grown with so much Reiki, and now you're a Reiki master teacher, obviously your psychic skills have progressed over time, and I'm curious if you rely on that gift personally. Do you use that for your own growth, or do you always look to other Reiki masters for your guidance and support?
So yeah, I do sometimes use the psychic stuff for my own my own life. It's rare though. It's not something that I do often, and it's not something that I always do consciously. I feel like when you're in this kind of thing, you're in this energy, and you're in it for long periods of time throughout the day. Sometimes messages just randomly come to you, and you're not even really consciously thinking about asking a question or looking at something. But yeah, I remember when, like during the pandemic, Karen and I had been in Costa Rica leading a retreat, and both of us spent a few extra days there. And then when I came home, there were only a few days before the whole world shut down. And that weekend, I see Sheetal on my screen, she was scheduled for one of the courses. I was going to teach a Reiki level 3 Reiki master's course that same weekend that everything shut down. And I also had booked 2 Reiki level 1 courses and 2 Reiki level 2 courses. So I had like 5 courses that I had to, all these courses are taught in person, right? And you're hands-on with people, and there was very close contact. And so I had to cancel all 5 courses, and I hate holding on to people's money. And the world back then was very chaotic. Actually before 2020, I was terrified about 2020. People might not have asked this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. I was actually terrified about 2020, and I didn't ask why. I couldn't figure out why, but I just had this feeling that something not so good was going to happen. And I also was a little bit, it was eerie because everyone was so, thank goodness 2019 is over. Thank goodness it's over. And I don't know how 2019 was so bad. I don't remember. Who remembers how bad 2019 was compared to the few years afterwards? But yeah, everything closed down, and it was sometime in the summer, and I had to pull out my pendulum. Like I pulled out this, not this one in particular, I had another one, and I pulled out my pendulum and I asked, should I start teaching Reiki again? And I got a yes. And I literally was just like, I'm not doing it. And I put the pendulum away, walked away, made a sandwich. I don't know what I did. Came back a couple weeks later, picked up the pendulum, just on a whim. Okay, let's just ask the question: should I teach Reiki again? Yep. And I still didn't want to do it. I just still didn't feel comfortable. Put it away again. I must have asked it 3 or 4 times before I opened up again. And so yeah, I do use all of these tools in my own life. Sometimes it feels more embedded because I'm in the energy a lot more, and it doesn't feel as like I'm doing anything special. It doesn't feel like I'm going out of my way in any way. But there are often lots of times where I do also, like Jess is a mentor to me, and I do check in with him at times about things. He's also kind of like my big brother, my big, slightly younger, but big brother to me. So, sometimes when he says things, I'm like, really? And I don't always listen right away, but like there was a time where, I think it was 2014, and we were back, remember Skype? Remember that thing called Skype? I was on Skype with Zoom, with Jess, sorry, not Zoom, with Jess. And he said, Salima, I'm getting a message for you. You need to be doing readings for people. And to my mind, I got this image of like a turban and the blue eyeshadow and the crystal ball and the velour curtains behind me and like a big sign in my window that said psychic reader. And I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. You're never going to get me to do that. And he was like, I'm seeing lineups of people who need messages, they need this kind of support, and it feels like it's the right thing for you to do. And I'm like, I don't think so. And I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up and I typed out all of the information that you see on my website about Akashic Soul Path readings. Even the name just sort of flew off of my fingertips. I didn't even think about what to call it. It just sort of all wrote itself. And I remember I started with 20-minute readings for $20, which was crazy. So I had, as soon as I sent out the email, I had like my first appointment was actually the very next day. And just for anyone that wants to do readings for people, if you don't do 20 minutes. It's too short. You can't really give people a lot of information in 20 minutes. Plus, you're going to feel like you're really under the gun. But one of the great things that it did for me was it forced me to practice my psychic awareness under the gun. Like, and so I had a lot of these 20-minute appointments before I stopped doing 20-minute appointments anymore. And so, yeah, I have used a lot of these things for myself, and I have also relied on the mentorship of my teacher, both.
Well, I have so many more questions that were posed to me about Reiki. I feel like as a mindfulness society talk, got to get to a little bit of mindfulness before we open up the floor to everyone. And I would love to ask some general ones, but I feel like let's just like get a little more interesting. And this one hits home for me, so I kind of wanted to ask. This one was submitted to me, but it was, when did you realize that mindfulness was the real path out of suffering?
Well, I think I don't know if there was a moment when it happened.
Or perhaps like a moment when you realized it was the real deal, like there was something that was like, this is exactly what I've been meant to do.
Yeah, it took a while. It took a while for me. I'm very naturally mistrusting and skeptical of things. And so, and I think that's a good thing. I think everyone should be to do your due diligence, check if you have a teacher or you have, whatever, check it out, actually spend some time taking a look at what's really going on behind the curtain. I think there were a number of things that happened that helped me understand that this is the real stuff. One of them is that even just from my healing work, I would see people who looked perfect on the outside, like perfect, absolutely perfect. Their life is so perfect. And then behind the scenes, they were having some of the worst experiences and going through some of the worst suffering of all. And so it was very clear to me that everyone suffers. Like that was crystal clear. I also, because I just followed everything that Jess offered, I just took all the courses. When I started learning mindfulness with him, I started to see the truth for myself. So I saw the truth of impermanence. I saw the truth of non-self. I think non-self was the first thing that I actually saw. And I saw the truth of the suffering itself. And it was just so crystal clear. And it was like I tried to poke holes in it. I tried to refute it. I tried to look at it from other angles. I tried to see it from, I tried to see, where it was incorrect. And I came up with nothing. It was airtight. And I remember reading some of the scriptures, like the Buddhist scriptures. And I remember reading the Buddha's words, and he would come about a topic from every possible angle, like every direction he would delineate in detail, every single way in or way out. He would enumerate everything. Like he was such an incredible, like maybe the best logician of all time. And when I would read these things, and I'm not a follower of the scriptures, like I don't read the scriptures all the time. It was just something that instead of TV, I would sometimes, look at some of these things and try and understand them. And I understood that when he would teach something, he would teach it fully. He would teach it completely fully. And when I heard the story of like his path and his enlightenment, and it kind of felt a little bit like me, like I grew up having everything I needed, and yet I was still unhappy, yet I still suffered. I saw a lot of people around me suffering. I saw, this was something that was very clear. There was no question about it. And when I could get a sense of the teachings and what was actually being looked at, nowhere else could I find anything that was so pure and so true. And so I think that was like in a very logical way, not just my experiences of seeing like my hand moved and I didn't do it, like the non-self, or I had this feeling, like this huge anger, irritation comes up, and then it just falls away by itself. Where did it go? I have no idea, right? Like I would see these things in my experience. And then when I went back and I also went and tried to pull the curtain and I did my due diligence and I looked at the teachings. They were complete and airtight and true. And you can't argue with that.
100% agree. And I'm seeing the time and I'm going to open up to questions shortly, but I'm just going to ask, I guess, to maybe wrap it up. I can't help but want to know just like a little bit about what your self-care, more like spiritual routine is in your life. For all of us are making this effort, and we continue to push for this active community. Like what efforts do you take on your day-to-day basis?
So I do practice some Reiki for myself every day. I'm not a morning person. I never really have been a morning person. That might be surprising to some people. They might think like everyone in a spiritual context wakes up at 4 a.m. and does their, hour of meditation. And that's never been my experience. I've always been anxious growing up. I've had a lot of trauma, gone through a lot of those types of experiences. So for me, I always had to try and prove something. And so I would never sleep. I would always try and do everything perfectly. I always have to be excellent at everything. I had to do everything fully. And I was not really someone who could fall asleep easily. It would always take me, time, because there's always so many interesting things that I had to finish or do or look at or investigate. And so in the morning when I wake up, I find Reiki to be a really great buffer between that, like, haven't slept enough and need to get going and need to get into my day. So before I left my workplace, I'd already learned Reiki level 1, Reiki level 2, and I think Reiki level 3 before I actually left my last workplace. So for those of you who are busy and you need to get to work in the morning and stuff like that, I just set my alarm for an hour before I would normally wake up. And I'd be in that groggy, hazy, sleepy place, and I'd just be giving myself Reiki. Like I would literally wake up sometimes before the alarm and my hands were like buzzing, and they still do sometimes when I wake up, and it would feel like, oh no, the Reiki, I'm wasting it, like it's escaping and it's going into the ether. So I'd feel bad that I was wasting this energy, and I'd put my hands, in the hand positions and give myself a Reiki treatment. And by the time I got to my feet, I was wide awake. I was ready for my day. So that was for a long time a habit that was instilled in me. Probably my guides or the energy itself was like, Salima, this is for you. You need to do this. And then when I started practicing mindfulness, I started to introduce mindfulness into it. So I would at least do a few minutes of mindful awareness practice after my self Reiki. And that would fluctuate. Like there were times where I was doing like 20 minutes. There was times I was doing 45 minutes. It really depended on my energy levels, what I was doing that day. And whenever I was working, I was always inevitably doing the work of like 3 people. Anytime I left a workplace, they would hire 3 people. So I didn't always have tons of time, but I would always try and do just a few minutes of awareness practice. And so that's still there. Like when I give myself Reiki in the mornings, and some people will give themselves Reiki at night, and you can do that. I'm not saying that this is the only way to do things, but I'll always spend a little bit of time afterwards and practice in mindfulness. I do find that there are days where it's tough to practice mindfulness for a long period of time. And so there are times where it's like, okay, it's going to happen, while I'm walking or while I'm, so sometimes it's a walking meditation. Sometimes it's I'm doing this repetitive thing over and over again. And so I have to bring my mindfulness practice into my day as much as I humanly can. So today I was collecting seeds from my garden, from my native plants, and there's a whole process of collecting and storing and all that kind of stuff. And so while I was sitting there and doing this for maybe an hour, I've got my mantra and I'm practicing, and I'm just doing this repeated thing. And so bringing it into mundane activities like chopping vegetables or taking a shower, like and I do things that are a little different and hard. So, for example, I don't take a shower like normal people do. I have like a beautiful porcelain pitcher, and I, that's my time to squat. So I literally squat in the tub, and I have a pitcher. And when the pitcher is being filled up, I'm freezing. So I'm watching my body like freezing. And then when the pitcher is like filled with water, I dunk myself under the pitcher, like I, pour it over my head. And then I notice like the warmth and I'm happy again. And then when the water, like I can feel the water going down, I put the pitcher back. So there's all these little tiny micro habits that I bring into my day to day to ensure that I'm doing my practice. And then everything else just falls into place around that. I try to, in between clients, if I have time between clients, I usually do spend at least a little bit of time between clients, sort of resetting. So I will take a few moments to just kind of sit and relax and feel my body and do a bit of body awareness. I don't go out for walks as much in the forest because now the forest looks like a jungle of invasive plants. And so where it used to be this like happy refuge, or this, place where I would go to reset, now I'm kind of like, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. So I don't do that as much. But I do spend time in my backyard. And so when I'm outside, and you can see there's an area where the grass is really worn, where I do my walking back and forth. The grass is all worn down in that area. I'm not very popular in my house because I wear down the grass in my walking practice, but I try and incorporate those things into the day as much as I humanly can in formal practice, and as well as a lot of informal practice in other ways. Yeah, I don't know. I think those are the two main modalities, the two main things. But if there was one more, I would say before I go to bed, I always try and do a few minutes of metta before bed. So sometimes the sleep just wins, and sometimes I get a really great metta where I can get through myself and a loved one and another loved one and another. There's always like the loved ones, and then there's the community, and then there's like the students, and then there's the all the way out to all beings. There are times where I do get all of them in, but sometimes I fall asleep at niece or nephew or someone like that. So yeah, I do a little metta every night. So there, hopefully that answers the question.
Those were amazing tidbits and a wonderful way to circle around what we talked about this evening. And I know we had so much to cover, and I know I took up so much time, but I would love to open up the floor to anyone. You're welcome to raise your hand if you're on video, or raise your hand virtually. I know Judy's got a typed combo in, but I'm hoping some of the people who submitted questions might be willing to unmute themselves and just ask. The setting, I believe, is off, so you can just unmute yourself, Asher. Go for it. Thank you. You're up. Well, I'll unmute you.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Yay.
Yay.
Okay. So my question is, when are we having a Reiki Society of Canada?
So yeah, thank you for asking that question. Jess has told me that I should. This is one of those where I'm like, yeah, okay. It's a lot of administration, and I don't want to put myself in an administrative capacity anywhere. I want to do as little administrative stuff as possible. And I feel like if I were to start a Reiki society, I would have to have a database, and I would have to have spreadsheets, and just the idea just feels too cumbersome. But I think I'll ask you a question in return, Asher. If there was a Reiki Society of Canada, what would you like the Reiki Society of Canada to offer you?
The same thing as the Mindfulness Society of Canada, pretty much an how do I put it? An association or some kind of a body where you can put forth your standards, because your version of Reiki is, I guess you could say, the true version of Reiki versus all those other people out there that you mentioned it earlier tonight. That all there are a lot of people out there who think they know Reiki, but they don't, and they're not properly tuned, but they think they are. And then you have people giving level 1 and level 2 all in one shot, and that just doesn't feel right that someone would be to go through that quickly. So this would create a kind of a standard
Right.
and build some kind of a association where we would say, like, this is Reiki. You want real Reiki, come to us. You want to go to those other Reiki people, you can do that if you want. So that's kind of what I'm because that's what Jeff is doing with Jess is doing with the Mindfulness Society is trying to he's building an association, a group of people that people can see, like, and it's made it easy for me because when people ask about mindfulness, I steer them to Mindfulness Society of Canada.
Mhm.
And then they do a search on the web, or I can just send them the link and then they can go through it that way rather than, oh, I know this guy Jess and blah blah blah, and then it kind of it has more credibility to it, more oomph.
Yeah. I could do something really simple and just change the name of my own website from Salima to Reiki Society of Canada and be done. So I'll consider that. That's easy. That's the easiest thing in the world for me to do. So thank you for that, and it is noted. I will take this forward and consider it.
Or you could just create another website alongside of
Nah,
it,
nah. I don't want to have another website. One is fine.
because there are lots of people here. There are lots of people here that I'm sure would love to help you. So it's just a matter of accessing us. I
Okay,
mean,
here, let me put this back out to anyone who wants to help in that direction. Send me an email with your resume, and I will take a look and see what your skills are and if they fit to help with that sort of thing. So there you go.
there
Yeah,
you go.
I
All
love
right.
it. Building a
good.
community here. Thank you, Asher, for always being willing to jump in and ask a question. Anyone else want to jump in, raise a hand or put up a virtual hand? I have the unmute setting turned off, so my apologies why it's asking to unmute, but feel free. Anyone, anybody? There's a question from Judy in the chat that says, what do you see in the next few years for yourself?
Ooh, okay, so let's see. Um, it's a very interesting question because I've kind of found myself at a bit of a crossroads this year where a lot of people's lives sort of fell apart in 2020, 2021, 2022. Um, I was working solidly and maybe more so than I ever was before. And it just seems like this year feels like a year where I've had to really kind of take a good look at, like, what am I doing? Where am I spending my time? Is this what I want in the future? All that kind of stuff. So Judy, as soon as I know, I will tell you. As soon as I find out, I will tell you. But for the meantime, business as usual. I'm going to be taking a sabbatical, so I haven't been to Thailand. I used to go every year. I haven't been since the pandemic started. And I'm going to be taking a couple of months. So I'll be away and I'll be focused on my mindfulness practice, not talking to people, not taking clients from the end of January till the end of March. So sometime in there, things will clarify a lot more for me, I'm pretty sure.
Amazing. Thank you. I look forward to seeing how it unfolds for you in the years ahead.
Me
Anyone
too.
Maybe I'm sure Salima could give another minute or two if anyone else wants to raise a hand or a virtual hand. And we are hitting 8:30, so I totally understand if everyone is ready to move on to the next part of their evening. I'll give you guys like another 30 seconds to contemplate.
I'm lucky I didn't get any like very personal questions. Lucked out. Don't get any ideas, by the way.
Saving them for round two.
Round two. No, I think that was great. Jen, did you get through all your questions?
Oh gosh, no. I probably have another 10 that were submitted, so
Do you want to ask an easy one? A quick one?
I'm not sure if any of them are easy going forward. I kind of went with the easiest ones I could find. But maybe you can say, but the last one was a good one. It was a bit of both. Was, do your psychic abilities support your mindfulness practice? If so, how?
No. That was an easy one. The psychic abilities do not support my mindfulness practice. No. Do my mindfulness practices support my other practices? Yes. It's the other way around.
Great answer. Such a short answer. I love it.
Yes. Yes.
So I'll quickly jump in then and thank you, Salima, for sharing so much of yourself tonight, and being so willing to do this with me. I see lots of nods, so I know we're all grateful for you sharing your heart and your time tonight, and